Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to continue our 2023 season reviews for the Baltimore Ravens. Today, we're going to talk about the offensive tackle situation. 4 players really in question, so this ought to be a short episode if you've listened to a lot of these monsters as we've been through this. Joining me for this is Alec Poulianis. Alec, how you doing?
Doing great, Ken. Great to talk to you again.
Always, Alec does a great job on One Winning Pod. Tell folks also where they can just hit you up on Twitter.
Yeah, you can find us at One Winning Pod, or you can follow me at A Poulianis.
All right. So the tackle situation, a difficult one for the Ravens, because in addition to this enormous exodus of talent across the roster at multiple expensive positions, edge, wide receiver, etc., they have to, fortunately, they don't have the quarterback leaving this year, but they have to try and figure out how they replace what I think will be both offensive tackles, replace or extend. That's on the table as well over the next 2 seasons. But Morgan Moses, 1 more year under contract. Ronnie Stanley, theoretically 2 years under contract. But there's a decision point this year with a potential $8.3 million savings, and then a subsequent decision prior to the 2025 season where there would be a $20 million savings if they cut him in the final year. A lot of barrier of entry costs, though, will figure into what options they have in addressing the position.
That's right. This is I was actually kind of excited to do this show with you because I think tackle is a fun one that we've kind of had on the back burner since signing Moses. Now, granted, we did pick up Falele in the draft, but there hasn't been too much action to this position. It's been the same group of characters for a couple years in a row now, and now suddenly everyone is leaving by 2025 at the latest, most of which leaving by 2024. And this is not a position group that you can turn over in 1 year, in my opinion. And I feel like you feel the same way. It takes time to develop these players, particularly in the areas that the Ravens end up drafting, and also good left tackles just simply do not become available in free agency because they're such a hot commodity. It's similar to the quarterback. You almost get screwed into signing them as long as they're good enough because you just can't live without them. And obviously you want to sign the great ones. That's easy. But I feel like even the margin players get signed because it's just so hard to live without in the league. And it makes it. I feel like this is a situation I'm shocked Moses got to us. Granted, right tackles are a little bit easier to find, but I feel like both tackle positions are usually homegrown for that reason.
Yeah, it's a very good point across that. Have very high barriers to entry. Signing a right tackle is always much cheaper, but it's become more expensive in these last couple of years. One of the interesting things about Moses, despite the fact he's always been very good in space, is that he's really never been considered a left tackle option at any point for the Ravens. And obviously Stanley's missed plenty of time, but they've always used either Falele or McCary primarily at that position to replace him. And it's never been a consideration that they would move Moses to the left side.
I always found that surprising, but after a while, no longer questioned it. It was one of those things okay, they're not doing it. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. I guess let's jump right in on Ronnie Stanley, who certainly was at a crossroads this season. He really needed to play to make sure that $8.3 million savings the Ravens can have this year wasn't, harvested by the team, basically. But, what I've seen from him is his play in the last few games in particular has put me over the fence, over the line, whatever you want to call it, into that he's worth the gamble for 2024 now. I was not there at midseason. I really thought it was still very much up in the air, that the rest of the season was going to determine it. And obviously, the most recent information is the most pertinent, in particularly for a player coming back from injury like Ronnie has. And I thought he's looked quite a bit better these last 4 games or so.
He did. And it was one of those things, he got injured really early in the year, missed some time, came back, kind of nagging injury problem. He even looked gimpy at some point during the postseason. And it's one of those things where just, Stanley just couldn't stay healthy this year. And that resulted in, I feel like, a really difficult season to evaluate because you just really have no clue how healthy he was at any given point. in the season. I guess like he was fully healthy at the beginning, right? But yeah, it's a tough one. I do think with the performance that we saw in the divisional round specifically, that he secured himself the opportunity to play next year. And frankly, like we were talking right before the show, at $8 million, I don't really see who you could sign at tackle. And I feel as though you would have to spend money at tackle. You would not be able to simply just draft your way out of that problem at that point. And yeah, I think it's fine to keep him at this rate because he has the potential to perform at over that $8 million figure.
I'm looking at the last 4 games, and he's at an aggregate score of .83, which has raised his score for the season up to .63. Okay, and that's his raw score. Now, the just in grade levels, the last 4 weeks, I'll give that to you because I think that's easier to see. After consecutive Fs against Jacksonville and San Francisco, both on the road in week 15 and 16, where he played very poorly both games, he's had an A, a C, an A, and a B plus in the last 4 games as I scored it. That's enough for me to say, and also just trait-wise, characteristic-wise, what I was seeing, getting out in front of run blocks, lining people up in space, blocking rather than mirroring and giving ground consistently. He was blocking to maintain a broader pocket, which I think helped Lamar at times there. I just think there was a lot more to like about Stanley's play these last 4 games. He actually has looked better. And damn it, it's about time in terms of not it's about time. That's the wrong thing. He really needed it. Let's put it that way. His play for the year, even when I add in those 4 games, is barely above Fa'alele for the year. Fa'alele, .62. He was at .63. And to give relative marks for everybody, McCary, I don't want to get this right, is either .70 or .71. So he outplayed Stanley in aggregate for the season. But let me get to it so I'm not misstating the number. Yeah, McCary at tackle, .70 for the year. That'll be right there at about a middle of the C range, whereas Stanley was at the top of or high in the D range, we'll call it, or maybe actually midway in the D range, frankly, for that differential. And Fa'alele played well the last 4 games of the season in totaling high 90s, I believe, in terms of snaps. So it's a game and a half as we look at this thing. Yeah, the games he played, Jacksonville through Houston, he had a total of 97 snaps, but it's the best football he's played. He had a C average for that time, which is a huge step up from where he'd been early in his career. And then Moses was the best of the tackles at .77, and that's a solid B for him for the whole year. He's the one guy who's not in any danger at all of what his playing time, what his responsibilities will be for next year.
Seems that way. I think it's interesting that McCary played so well this year and above Ronnie Stanley and the aggregate score. I do forget, is there any, I don't think you do adjust at all for left tackle versus right tackle.
For quality of competition, not left tackle versus right tackle, but oftentimes since the left tackle often faces better pass rushers, he'll get a slight bump there. I would say on average, it might be about 0.02 per game, something like that. Okay. This is an adjustment to score. It's not much, but right tackles, sometimes they get TJ Watt too. So, it's definitely on.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah. Cool. The big difference, and if you notice differences between the way I've scored a game and PFF is typically in terms of penalties. I do also protect the cone in a way that I think PFF isn't quite as aggressive doing, but the quarterback's got to be able to step into his throw without fear of getting his leg hit in that process. And that's something that I'm, it ends up, I score more pressures, even though I give out partial pressures, I score more pressures than PFF does. In terms of his run blocking towards the end of the year, I think we saw some things from Stanley that were very good. Always, even when he's been not playing well, Stanley has a lot of extreme veteran savvy on that left side. He's always been a guy who, when he was healthy, could contribute to backside of run blocks. And now it's more like he knows how to do just enough to get an inside guy off track and out of the play on that left side, and then still bounce a guy on the outside so he can't affect the play either. So he often gets a double block on the backside of a run play, where that backside defender, often that backside edge defender in particular, can often be the guy who blows up a run play from behind.
Yeah. I also really appreciated this year his ability to play in the overload sets. He would be frequently the one that would be, I guess, displaced, for lack of a better word. And something we didn't explore too much, but I thought something that he looked good in those plays and really highlighted his ability to play in space.
Yeah, they that's a great point. And one of the reasons what Alec is saying is exactly on the money. Is Stanley, when he goes out, is the player who wraps up the offensive line on that side. So it's Moses getting tucked and effectively becomes a guard in some ways of thinking of it, an interior lineman when he's in that position. And it's not that role isn't important. It's just Stanley has got a very large role in terms of decision making on that outside role. And sometimes he would be covered up by a sixth offensive lineman. But there was even one play where I think Isaiah Likely lined up inside him and he lined up outside still. So you remember what I'm talking about. Isaiah Likely was offset by half a body length, so it was a legal formation, and Stanley was on the line of scrimmage outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a very tricky play. I'm sure that was talked about at 98 minutes before the game.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, probably. In terms of the meeting with the officials you're referring to, that would be a time you wanted to tell them about. So a tough year for Ronnie Stanley, one that I'm sure he would not want to repeat. Let's talk about a couple of like handicapping situations. The first would be maybe give it to me in three. Okay. We're going to have, I think there's four outcomes that create the entire universe. And outcome number one is the Ravens cut him for the cap savings this year.
Sure.
Option number two is the Ravens go ahead and pay him, but cut him in 2025. And option number three is the Ravens keep him for 2024, and he plays so well that they can work out an extension for 2025. So they obviously that involve a restructure, void years, all that stuff that would make it easier for them to take a temporary cap hit there and come back. I think that's the entire universe. I mean, you're a tech guy. Oftentimes you can think of an example that falls between the cracks in there, but I think that's the entire universe of possibilities.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So assign me a percentage to each of those that sums to one. I'm going to do the same. I'll write it down and you can then just announce yours. Okay, let's see. Let me think about that. Yes. Okay, I've got mine.
Oh man, this is tough. Cool. I think I'm done.
Okay, so you can go ahead and announce. I've got mine written down. I want to write yours down too next to mine here. So cut in 2020, but prior to 2024.
So cut like this going into this season. I put it 5%.
Okay, I put it at 15. I don't think it's impossible. I think one of the reasons I think it might be a little bit higher, although I'm in favor of keeping him, is that the Ravens may go to him and ask him to take a pay cut. And they may also decide that somebody like Madubuike is worth keeping, or if you have to go through a rebuilding year now, because they look at all of the barriers to entry at various positions and say we can't be competitive in the way we want to be this next year. That's a year where Stanley probably goes earlier rather than later. So it's not an ideal situation, but I get the 15 overall on that. I understand why you'd be at 5. Cut in 2025 and not extended.
I had at 60%.
60%. Okay. And I have that at 75. It's definitely the most likely. We agree on that. And then, so you would have him extended beyond 2025 at 35% then? Because that's got to be all that's left, right?
I actually have one more scenario. My bad.
Okay.
In my head, I thought you said 4 scenarios. In my head, I also had the scenario of he just plays the last 2 years of his contract, and that's it.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. That actually falls between the cracks then. So divide it out for me. How would you put?
I had 25% at extend and 10% at the I guess just plays out the contract. And that's actually part of the reason I was thinking about was that last number, those 2 pieces there. I think it's the only way that happens is he plays well enough in 2025 where like you're like, okay, he's good, but like we just know like this guy's a ticking time bomb. like we'll take one more year. Like we'd rather just wait and figure it out after the year. Like we don't need to make a cap savings. Let's just go ahead and see the contract. So I think it's pretty likely that would be the case. I almost want to flip him now because I just don't see wanting to have to pay him early. Like I don't fully believe in the cap savings in that way. Like you could save the cap later, like the way you want to do it. Like I would just leave it on the dollars there. I would just want to see that year. I would want to see, like at Stanley's point, I would want to just see every single year possible before making any choices.
I mean, that's fair. I just think the pressure is going to be very high to restructure him in some way prior to 25, and it will probably come in the form of an extension. And they'll then suffer. First of all, it'll mean they're pushing more cap out via this void year mechanism they seem to be in love with at this point, and trying to get out from under, cap hell in 25 hitting. Mm-hmm. And he's one of the big moving parts for that you have a lot of money there. So I think that I would actually think the least likely thing would be that he would play on that contract in 25. I think he almost has to be extended or cut. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely have to talk more about the cap. I know I mentioned to you guys I would like to do a show about the cap. I think it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you're into it. And I like I always say on this show, and I said a couple of times now this offseason, is the most credible people in terms of people I really want to hear what their ideas are about picking up players or trying to sign one particular Raven are the people who are willing to do two things. One is tell me where you're not going to spend. And two, come with a credible cap impact of this, and not just a 2024 cap impact, but the actual long-term cap impact of spending season ticket holder money, as I call it, on the thing. You spend all of Bashadi's money you want on positional coaches, by the way. You're free to do that.
Yeah. I think that's a great scheme. Yeah, against the cap.
Let's talk Morgan Moses. Another fine year here. I'm still astounded by the guy's mobility. How he does working in space, his ability to pull has just been a revelation over the years. I put out the feelers. If Morgan Moses, if you listen to this show, love to have you on to talk offensive line play, in particular, how you're able to maintain momentum, line up blocks in space, do what you do as a puller, because it's remarkable for a man his size. And he came to the Ravens without a reputation as being that guy. Fair or not? I mean, I was just not aware of it.
Yeah, I don't know. When we signed him, it wasn't clear to me. I knew that he played well, but it wasn't clear to me that he played at this level. And I really do think he had a renaissance in his career when he got here. I don't know if that's Joe Alessandris's doing or what, but he's playing super well. And the guy is an absolute gladiator, barely misses any time in his career, 8 glass and only missed like one game with a torn pec or whatever it was. And just played through it all year. Eventually, had this kind of rotation thing going on, which I think was actually the highlight of the whole year. Very fascinating to have all your tackles play in every game down the stretch. And I thought he was like the glue that made the season possible in many ways. Offensive line play is so critical to offensive success. And I felt like, McCary did a very admirable job filling in with Stanley and in fact, scored better in your system than Stanley did. I know that Falele played his best game at the end, but I just really feel like that could have been the part that really broke the camel's back with the offense if he was out. And it was really great that Moses was able to power through.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And in some ways, I think Moses needed or really it benefited the Ravens tremendously to have Moses take a little bit of time off. They did that very interesting system where they staggered the rotation for these players, meaning they never had McCary and Fa'alele on the field at the same time. It was always McCary would come in for the second or third series, and then Fa'alele would be in for the next series, replacing Moses with Stanley back on. I thought that was an interesting way to do it. So they were definitely wanted to keep 4 out of 5 man continuity and the top player on each side. I thought that was a really good way to go about that. But I think both players benefited, and I think even more than that, perhaps when you have a star player like Stanley and also a near star player like Moses, you have 2 players who it's easier for them to both kind of accept the same reduction in role at the same time because we're doing it on both sides. We're doing it to keep you guys healthy for the postseason. We're doing it because you guys are critical, and their actual usage of the thing backed that up. So they didn't. It wasn't just a sales job to them. It was also that was the way they actually did it. But it was easier to sell it to them because they were doing it to both tackles at the same time.
I agree with that. I think the offensive line in general was maybe the top schemers of all position groups as far as getting the best out of their players by doing mind tricks. We can also go back to the whole Salah thing and John Simpson. So a lot of 3D chess going on in that unit.
Yeah, that's the Salah and John Simpson thing is one of the all-time greats. It's like, why don't you just say I'm going to be the left guard? And John Simpson can look at me and say, that guy's going to be able to.
They also brought Ricard in for that reason. That's actually the real reason, just to add into the lore.
Yes. I had forgotten about the whole Ricard at guard thing, but that is actually hilarious. When you come back to it.
I still think he should do it again next year. I think it'd be an amazing scheme for keeping more linemen on the roster.
Well, you heard that it did actually cut John Simpson's penalties. In Oakland, he had one penalty every 95.5 snaps for his career, and he cut his penalties to one every 95.4 snaps with the Ravens in 2023. So at that rate, he'll be good. We heard those chairs on The Simpsons, which are going to eliminate slouching by the year 3000. If you remember that reference, it's probably from about season 1 or season 2. But these are this is an example of that same kind of thing. It's a long-term project with John Simpson.
Yeah, you gotta get 1% better every day, right?
In this case, 0.1% better every year, and that doesn't quite work out as well. Yeah. All right. Okay. So we're talking about Moses here a little bit. Pass blocking, is solid throughout the year. Obviously, even when he played against some good players, the one thing I really liked, as I scored it, he never had a fall off the table game this year. In fact, he never even had an F. All of his scores were in the A through D range. And as someone who scores offensive line week to week, I'll just tell you, there's a lot of week to week variation in outcome. And I'm providing a box score. I'm not trying to tell you which exact stats mean a lot for the future. So I'm not trying to say these pressures aren't any worse than these sacks, because the pressures are the more are the number that is more stable year to year. I'm trying to tell you, what's the value of the things that happened in this game. So you're looking at a box score that says the guy had 2 home runs and a double and struck out 3 times in 4 at-bats the next game. I'm not trying to mitigate that. That's what my grading system tries to do. But it's very nice that Moses never had a failing grade the entire year.
Ken, I would hate to give you any more work, but I would think it would be fascinating if you were to track in the future it's subjective, but like the gotta have it downs. I feel like that was the biggest knock, if I had to say anything about Moses, and frankly, most of the offensive tackles we had, I felt in the gotta have it downs, that was the downs that they probably performed the worst in aggregate. Like they just were not able to step up to the occasion, and those were the times that Moses would get rushed right past or Stanley, etc. So that's definitely one of the tough ones. I felt like when defensive linemen really wanted it, outside linebackers really wanted it was a top high leverage play. That's when they were gone most of the time.
Okay, you know what? I think it's a worthwhile thing to try and study. It's probably an off-season thing, or I have to get better at figuring out ways to re-indexing my plays. So it should not be more work, because the work's already been done. So it's a matter of trying to sort what you have and tabulating it properly.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's definitely, I that was like one of those things like we talked about it. Like we were like, I think that's the case, but we aren't writing it down. It's just like totally off the dome.
So let me ask you the one question about Moses here that I think is potentially significant. Is you're going into the final year of his contract. Is there any reason why you should think about extending him now?
So he's 33. Would be his last contract most likely. What, about 3 years maybe? Or if you're just doing the rolling twos.
I hate rolling twos. You know how I feel about those.
I'm just saying it's an option.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know what you do here. I mean, you save $5.5 million if you cut him. So you could save a little bit more money this year if you wanted to. I don't know.
No, I mean they're not going to cut him. The question is,
I'm saying is like that's the money that's like kind of fungible. If they were to extend, right?
No, if they okay, I see what you're saying. I'm not even trying to gain a bonus. I'm not trying to gain a 2024 cap bonus out of the extension. I'm trying to see if there's a player we need to have for 25 and 26 that we should get at a reasonable AAV by trying to sign him now as opposed to when he's at the end of his contract.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think he's a reasonable option. I think the big question would be the seriousness of the pectoral injury. I do know that he was mentioned as a candidate for surgery, but may or may not have it. It's like a lifestyle thing, right? He was because Marcus Williams was like, I'm not getting surgery. Morgan Moses was he might get surgery. So I think that would be a big part of it.
Okay. Oh, that obviously is a very big part of it. I hope surgery at this late date with the Ravens, in the playoffs until late January, does not mean that it would endanger the start of the regular season, because that would obviously be bad if true. But obviously you want him playing at a high level as well, and being healthy is very important.
I think if you were to get it now, it would at worst impact the first 4 games, kind of thing, and then. Okay. You at least have Falele playing at a level you might feel comfortable with. And I think that's actually the other big piece, too, is maybe this is a transition. But the level of play we saw at Falele could be exactly why you wait, but you only have 1 more year of him. So
of Falele or of Moses?
Of Falele. So, you're like, we're losing Moses in 24. Okay, sorry, I'm thinking ahead. So, you're saying Moses is playing right tackle in 2024, pretty much solid. Gotcha. So then, you only really would have 1 starting year of Falele if you were to not extend Moses. I don't know. I guess, if they really feel like they're in a cap situation that feels necessary, sure. But I would say if they like Moses enough, they should keep him. Okay.
All right. Well, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, obviously it is an indictment of Falele's ability to replace Moses. If you sign Moses for $7 or $8 million per year for a couple of extra years, you're basically saying goodbye to Falele without him ever getting any significant playing time here in Baltimore if things work out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's tough because I think he was a developmental project that seems to have developed decently. So I would suspect he will get a contract somewhere, if not with us.
Oh, sure. I mean, he's enormous. He's an enormous human being. It's just there's 2 things about Falele that are bothersome to me. Number one is the total sample size we're talking about, where he's actually played well. Okay, let's do this because it's worth looking at his whole career here. And I got to have the 2022 line up here too. But he played 180 total snaps this season that were scored in my system, and 97 at the end of the year. So he had 83 prior to that. Mm-hmm. And in his final 97 snaps, he's right around a 0.75 for that entire time. It raised his score for the year to 0.62. So you know how bad he was before that because it was less snaps. He was in the 40s prior to that in the year going into that. And last year for the whole season, that's about where he was, somewhere in the 40s. So this step forward that now covers 5 games and 97 snaps of this rotational play is an enormous leap forward, just an enormous leap forward. And just watching the guy play, I don't truly trust him to take over a tackle because he's still not aggressive enough with his hands. He doesn't do things particularly well there. I kind of think it's an overstatement in terms of how he scored. I mean, I'm really happy to see it because it's such a big improvement. But on the other hand, I kind of think it's an overstatement of how much we could really expect of him in the future. I think his true level of play is somewhere between those 2 goalposts.
Yeah, and it's interesting too when you look at the snaps. I guess at least the good news is in those last 4 games, he still had games where he played, 49% of snaps twice and then 25 and 30. So you can compare it directly to his highest snap count games because you can't even say when he plays more snaps, he's less effective. I don't think that's a fair argument based on kind of the stats, but I think it is a fair argument to say, okay, what if he played 100% of snaps? And that is unclear because I think if you go back to last season, now granted it's a year prior to his development, but those were the games where it was particularly bad, So
yeah, he led the Ravens in sacks allowed last year, and he's been by far the highest on the team in sacks allowed per snap played over his career here. So there's a lot of growth still possible. I mean, he's one of the guys, man. We'll just go ahead and talk about Fall Lily now while we're here. He could benefit so much from position coaching this offseason. And I don't know what he's getting. I don't know who he's going to. I don't know what offensive line school he's going to. But there's got to be ways he could better learn to strike with his hands. Because that's really all he needs to do is get the opponent off his pass rush plan by taking a punch at him. And obviously he's not just punching the guy below the belt or in the kidney or whatever. I mean, it's when you talk punching, we're talking about striking him usually in the shoulder, under the armpit, various places where that defensive lineman who had a plan to go to point A and then reverse to point B kind of thing or whatever it might have been is now saying ouch instead of making that second movement. There's got to be somebody who can help him on that. Really has not gotten there from the in season and the amount of time Joe D can spend with him. And I honestly think it's a much more time consuming thing probably to learn to get away from patty cake offensive tackle play.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you wonder if it's ever going to change at this point. It's been enough time, you would think, in the league and with this, seeing the level of competition that he needs to step up there. But this could be the year. It could definitely still be the year because, the first season he goes in, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. The second season, he thought he did enough, but he didn't. And then he gets real committed this year, right? Like you can see the path, but I don't know. He definitely needs to be more physical, and it makes you just wonder if he's just not that person.
Could certainly be the case. And, it's sad. You run into some people in life who are bigger guys who are just not extremely physical guys. They're not violent people, and they don't have to be trained to be nonviolent people. They're just nonviolent because nobody's ever given them any trouble, in real life, seriously. I mean, guys like that are, they're 6'6", 280. Nobody's going to challenge them to a fight or pick on them or anything like that. They're just, they never get treated that way. And there is something about growing up with an edge and having to deal with some of that and bringing it to the football field and taking it out on the guy opposite you. That's just generally speaking, a pretty positive thing for an offensive lineman to do.
For sure.
All right. What else do we want to say about Daniel Falele? I don't think I have anything else. Let's talk about Patrick McCary a little bit because obviously he's been talked about being a very versatile lineman for the Ravens. I'm beyond all the versatility at this point. What the Ravens need Patrick McCary to be is a serviceable backup left tackle. I don't want to ever see him playing another position because the injury risk is not worth it. We've seen it come up with players like Tyree Phillips, where he got injured playing guard when he really needed to be the backup tackle.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that. And the reason I'm putting the pushback is here we go. 30th pick in the draft, we select a left tackle. Let's say that one of the big six fall. I hear that's the number. I haven't done my evaluation yet. But so they fall down, we get that guy, and then we're like, okay, we really feel comfortable with this person playing left tackle. Does that allow you to have McCary be a true, versatility man, and then you don't keep on the roster a Saleh or a, Mustafa, you know what I mean? Like that, like fringe line guy. I could definitely see that being the case because you have to keep your tackles around. And yeah, just from a numbers game perspective.
Okay. So first of all, I completely agree with you. If you're saying he doesn't need to be the backup left tackle if he's really the third left tackle. I've got no problem at all with that. Okay, so if you have the luxury of moving him back to center, guard, right tackle, wherever he might help the team otherwise, then I'm fine with him being the backup. I'm just saying in the Ravens' current build, he is too valuable. Left tackle.
100%, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. And otherwise, had a solid year. He extreme variation in games for McCary. So just looking at this, he had a great game against Cincinnati. Let me go back to it here because I don't want to misstate this. Yeah, great game against Cincinnati in week 2. And he was on the left side, played 68 snaps, bottom of the A range, basically. And he's going up against Hendrickson in that game, a guy who has given him trouble at other times. The second time, of course, he faced him again, and he got a D+ in the game. That was in the game in Baltimore. Ravens won that one also, right? Yeah, they won both against the Bengals this year. So he had lots of variation. Otherwise, he had a terrible game against Myles Garrett in week 4, even though the Ravens won that game. And he had a really bad game against Myles Garrett again in week 10. So, and then against Highsmith in week 18, he was also quite bad. A .31 in that game. Stanley did play some of the games, but just if you look at the histogram for his play the entire season, it's all over the place. It's not at all like Morgan Moses, who's a very, none of the performances fall off the chart. McCary's got those at tackle, and that's why he's not the guy I would want, as my starting tackle for the year. But he's a guy, given the paucity of talent in the NFL at the position, I'm perfectly happy to have as the backup.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. I thought a very savvy move to extend him when we did, particularly considering the quality of snaps played at otherwise expensive positions. So
yes,
definitely was a good pickup there, and a young player. Only going into his year 27 season. Definitely feels like a guy who could be eligible for an extension, but at the same time, truly does feel like a luxury that we might not get to afford again.
Yeah, so he's signed through 24 only, and I have not heard any notion that McCary would be cut, but there is a $4.35 million cap savings. So it might be he's a case where you try and extend him, whether that means it's more cap manipulatable extension dollars where you can sign him to a 1-year deal with incentives, puts a bunch of money into void years that he gets paid at the end of the year, but also gives him a chance to earn some more money. He might be perfectly willing to do that. Maybe add a year at a reasonable price. But I agree with you. They've got a lot of hands out now for money, and a lot of places where they have to be very careful about spending it. And I don't know where you stand on the Madubuike thing, but the Madubuike thing will definitely send some other players packing if they tag him and retain him, whether he plays on the tag or whether he's extended.
Yeah, I would say my gut feeling is that if we were to tag him, we are trying to trade him, and I'd be okay with that. But I don't know if I want him extended to a long-term deal. Okay,
so you're not sure. Yeah, wow. So that puts him in an uncomfortable position of playing kind of chicken, because they have to be sure there's a team out there that wants him at some reasonable premium to the enormous contract they're going to have to sign him to, or just even some premium to the tag value this year. And another team might come along to him and say, look, you put yourself in this position, but we can't take him off your hands on the tag like this because we're not sure we can sign him. We'll give you a 5th round pick for him now, but we won't give you a 2nd round pick or a 3rd round pick. And then the Ravens actually lose relative to the value they could harvest from a pick in 25 that they would get if he just left. The one thing they cannot have Madubuike do is play on the tag this year. So they have to either figure it out for an extension or for a tag and trade. But they can't have him play on the tag this year.
Yeah, it's a complicated one for sure, but do trust EDC to figure it out.
Do you think there's what percentage chance would you put on him being not tagged and just allowed to walk?
15.
Okay. I was going to say 5 to 10. And it would really have to come down to, how do they want to deal with those dollars in there? Otherwise, I guess there's also the transition tag, isn't there? I'm not sure how that is
a tag I've heard of, but I don't remember what it does. I can't remember.
I think it's an offer matching version of the franchise tag. Okay. That there's no picks involved, but they basically send somebody out to the market and the Ravens get to match the offer made to them.
I see. So I guess if it doesn't screw up the comp pick situation, then that seems reasonable. I could add to the percentages.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get back to the offensive tackle situation here for a while. How do you foresee this offseason playing out in terms of what they try and do with the tackles they have and the tackles they might get in the draft? Where would you expect them to pick in terms of a tackle?
I feel like it has to be the first pick. I feel like it's a unless the draft goes kind of crazy and all these excellent tackles get drafted super fast, and there's nobody left at the end, and there's a large fall off or something in talent. I feel like it's kind of a must. The tackle gods are being kind to us with all these options, and I think it's the position I look most forward to studying this year, which is fun to say because I don't think I've ever said it. But like the tackle this year is the thing I'm most curious about. I want to know 25 tackles plus, and I would love to hire or to draft 2. I think it's reasonable, and I think it's a top priority, and I don't even feel bad. I don't feel like the Ravens need to feel bad about being in that position where they feel like they have to take a tackle because it's usually. I would say it's probably not a bad choice.
Okay. So
taking a tackle is always a good idea, in my opinion, as long as like it's a quality player and it's not like a crazy reach.
Right. So and that's often the question is, are you really getting Trevor Penning at that pick, who has, a lot of flaws, a lot of penalties, a lot of things that are red flags in terms of his pro play, which unfortunately did really show up in what happened his year with the Saints. But are you willing to do that? Because if you get a guy at the end of the first round and he ends up being a quality left tackle, the nice thing is your 5th-year option has real value because that's a position where he's tossed in with all the other linemen for purposes of determine how you have to pay him at the end of that. Whereas, picking Tyler Linderbaum meant that the Ravens probably can't use the 5th-year option as a way to derive additional value from that pick. They have to extend Linderbaum probably prior to his 4th season. They might use the option anyway and just threaten to pay a little more for him or use the franchise tag after 4 years. But they do have options on what they would do. But either of those is, you might end up paying tackle money for a center, which is what you want to do. So at left tackle, and this has also been true at edge and wide receiver and quarterback primarily, you really get value at the end of the first round with that 5th-year option. If it's any other position other than that, you generally, it's that cost on the tag is too high to really make it a good high value option.
Agreed. I think to me I guess like I just would draft. I only draft players I like. Like I don't like. I never liked Penning enough to draft him. Like I'm sure in the 4th or 5th round, but he's going to go before then. So it's like one of those like he's off my board essentially, right? So I'm comfortable saying no to a player and being wrong about them. I hate drafting players that I like or like that I didn't like, but because everyone else said they were good, and then like them turning out bad. Like I just like I don't feel good about it. Like I know maybe this is not the way to be a GM, and that's why I'm not one. But like I personally like to feel good about my picks no matter what.
Right.
And I don't like to take gambles on guys I don't actually like because like everyone else is telling me to. Like I have always felt bad that way. So that's just not the way I would draft.
There's another component to that, and I'd like to get your take on this. As somebody who discusses the draft after it's just happened, and you're on my draft show and whatnot frequently enough to talk about the value of trades and other things. As soon as a player is taken, I will have an opinion relative to my own, where I thought the guy should have fit in. And Caillou Blue Kelly was a guy I had as a no on my list of draftable corners. So I get sometimes honestly visibly upset with draft picks that get made. I was not happy with the Queen pick. And I remember being consoled by two of the people. I can't even remember. It was Coach was one of them or who was the other, but it might have been Michael Crawford. And trying to say, well, come on, you got to get over it, Ken. And I was like, no, I really like Xavier McKinney better.
Right.
I
remember that year.
Yeah. So there's been times it really shows up. The Derwin James pick, of course. But
Well, and the craziest thing too is like, we play the Rams and they're like, oh, we really liked Puka Nakua. I loved him. I said he would be great. And I'm like, he was drafted after Caillou Kelly. How did this happen? How could you possibly do this to us?
Yeah. So that's one of the things that happens in the draft, and it could happen at tackle also, which is why I feel okay talking about this on the tackle show, is that you can chase the value of a position group down because the rest of the league has a bigger need. And I think that's what happened to the Ravens at corner last year is Caillou Kelly was somewhere on their board as a need pick, maybe more than as a value pick. Although there are probably some scouts who said, hey, we love the way this guy plays football. He played in a bad situation at Stanford, blah, 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 blah. But the truth of the matter is he had a terrible year as a senior, just a terrible year. And he was one of the guys that it really didn't make any sense in terms of yards per target and whatnot, that he'd be at really even a draftable player. But if he was a draftable player, maybe he's a 7, a guy that you're okay losing to that first cut. The Ravens obviously hope they would, and he's been since cut by 2 other teams. So It's not like they were the only ones.
Not to like continue deviating off of the tackle conversation, but I do wonder if he got picked up by other teams for no other reason than he was drafted by the Ravens, and like maybe they saw something we didn't. Like, how much of that value? Because like I wouldn't be surprised if he was a training camp cut and never on another team again if it wasn't for the fact that he had draft capital associated with him.
That could be true. And I've got to look up on his wiki and see if he's with his 4th team yet, because he's probably signed a futures deal by now, right? So according to this, he's with the Commanders. Yeah, there's 4th team. So Ravens, Seahawks, Packers, Commanders. Now, he's actually claimed during the season, December 13th, he was claimed off waivers by the Commanders. One of the things about that is there is a lot more regression in the cornerback pool than just about any other in terms of the replacement level dropping during the season. So a player like Caillou Kelly is a player that a desperate team will look at late in the year.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. I think we pretty well covered all the tackle needs, including what will happen for next year. I'm expecting also a first round pick. I think it is their highest draft need. We've had news come out today that we're not going to talk about relative to the wide receiver room. We just don't have enough facts at this point to discuss it. Obviously, that could change the situation, but we're recording this on Thursday night, the 9th of February. This is going to come out a week from now, and we don't know if the world will have changed by then, but hopefully it won't have, and the Ravens' greatest need will still be at offensive tackle.
Yeah, I don't want to think about that. That'd be bad.
Yeah,
so
fair enough. Alec, always a pleasure talking football with you, or pretty much anything with you when we get the chance. And happy you came on. Tell folks where they can find your work.
Well, Ken, I'm very disappointed that we're not packing your bags for Vegas. I was looking forward to playing some craps with you.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe some other time. But you can find me online at Apolianis and at One Winning Pod.
All right. Other folks out there, the historical thing we're going to be working on this year is once there was a player, and I want you to give me that Raven who's not in the top tier of players. You don't have to do Yonder or Suggs or Lamar Jackson or anybody else. Give me that second tier player. You want to talk about Vinny Testaverde? He'd be okay. You want to talk about Trent Dilfer and what he did for the Ravens? That'd be cool. Brandon Stokely. That's a name from the distant past. But you've got that player that's a favorite to you for some reason, and you like this play for some reason. I want to hear you talk about that guy. And maybe, we bring back some memories of some players that really meant something to us from anywhere between now 5 and 27 years ago now, right? At this point, it could be. So would love to talk about some of those. Derek Alexander is a name that came up tonight as a really good Raven in the first couple of years of their existence. I think he'd be another fun one. But what I'd like you to do is DM me with your choice of player. I'll reserve that for you, and then we'll set a time to talk about him. And I'm going to talk with Alec right after the show is over and get his selection. But Alec, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Ken.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.